So we are continuing today in Shaar Habitachon. So we find ourselves towards the end of Parak Beis. So remember again, in this parak, now we've reached the point where we've gone through all the 7 criteria that a person or an entity has to reach in order for someone else to place their full bitachon in them. And it's become abundantly clear that no human being could reach that threshold. No human being could go ahead and truly master all 7 of the criteria. Now the Mechaber is showing how HaKadosh Baruch Hu does meet each of those criteria. So we're continuing now. The third quality, V'shu chacham v'lo yinutzach. So ultimately, again, that he's wise. That's quality number 4. Lo yinutzach, ultimately all powerful. In other words, nothing could overcome him. Kimosha amar chacham leiv va'amitz kochi mihik sha'ila va'yishlam va'amar lochashem agdula va'gvura va'tiveres va'netzach va'ahod uksiv Hashem elokayich bekerbech gibor yoshia. So again, we'll go through the psukim relatively quickly, but the psukim, of course, are brought just to support this idea that the Ribbon Shalom again is the chacham, is wise, and ultimately lo yinutzach. There is nothing. He's powerful, and therefore he's so powerful that nothing could go ahead and overcome him. He goes on. He explains. Vishu misyached b'hanhagas ha'adam mitchilas inyono v'aschalas gidulo. Furthermore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu ultimately is involved in a person's life from the beginning of his life until the end of his life. Kimo shenemar, Halohu avicha kanecha hu asecha ve'echoneneka. Va'amar, alecha nismachti mi beten mimei imi atagozi. So again, these psukim highlighting the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is my father, he's my master, he created me. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I've been relying on HaKadosh Baruch Hu since the womb. Va'amar, halo kechalav taticheni ukavina takpe'eni. Ushara inyan. So again, quoting psukim to highlight this idea that the Ribono Shel Olam ultimately, again, is someone who is effectively, fully involved in my life from the beginning till the end. Kadosh Baruch Hu satisfies the 6th criteria. B'sho'alto ve'azeko eno b'shus adam. Ultimately, again, this idea, that we also know that ultimately everything that happens to a person, right, whether it's positive or negative, what he calls ta'alto means those things that help, hezeko, those things that harm, are not under the dominion of man, but rather ki biyad habori yis'alu levado. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu controls it. So remember again, in criteria number 5, we're talking about the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is involved in my life from beginning to end. In criteria number 6, we're talking about that HaKadosh Baruch Hu controls everything. Kimo shenemar miza amar batei Hashem lo tziva mipi elyon lo teitze haraos v'atov v'amar yavish chatzir novel tzitz udvar lo kim yakum li olam v'amar Achin chatzira am ukvar hisbar ha'inyan hazeh b'maimar hashlishi min haSefer hazeh b'ma sheyesh bo that. Fine. So again, the idea over here being that halacha l'maisa, or hashkafa l'maisa, we should say, that criteria number 6, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu ultimately again controls everything, both that which I perceive as good, as beneficial, and even that which I perceive as detrimental. Next, remember again, criteria number 7 was that the HaKadosh Baruch Hu bestows good even when I'm not deserving of it. He bestows good upon me at all times in life. So, Kimoshin Ne'emar, Tov Hashem Lakol, V'rachamav Al Kol Ma'asav. Hashem is good to all, and His compassion is on all of His creations. V'amar, No Sein Lechem L'chol Basar Kili Olam Chazdo. V'amar, literally again, He gives bread, He gives sustenance to every living item, for His compassion is eternal. V'amar Poseach Es Yadecha. Umas bia lechol chay ratzon, as the pasuk in Ashrei says, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu literally goes ahead and opens His hand and sustains all living things. V'aseichel goes there b'kabetz ela shiven yonim b'bori yisrael mibilti anivraim lachin hevesi ela psukim min hakasav l'zikaron bilbad. So remember again, now the Mechaber explains we have successfully proven the idea that it is only HaKadosh Baruch Hu who ultimately encompasses and really fulfills these 7 criteria, and as a result of this, the Ribono Shel Olam is deserving of our bitachon. Let's say a little bit differently. There's really nothing else in this world you could have bitachon in besides the Ribono Shel Olam. The Mechaber just points out to her, he says, by the way, I also quoted all of these psukim just to go ahead and allow you to remember these different criteria. The psukim ultimately again are a source for this idea. So the Mechaber goes on, and this is the last section of Perek Beis. Ukvakasher yisbarer zeh la'adam v'tischazek hakaraso ba'amitas chesed haborei. Now, when this whole thing becomes clear to a person, what becomes clear to a person? That indeed HaKadosh Baruch Hu meets all of the criteria, right? And there's a recognition that ultimately, again, there's a chesed, there's a kindness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has. Yiftach bo. So here, what's very interesting is as follows. So, what the Mechaber is really focusing on over here is really sounds like a little bit more of like criteria number 7, which is that the Ribono Shel Olam's chesed is constant, consistent, and is applied even when we may not be deserving of it. So once I know this, once I know that he meets criteria number 7, meets all the other criteria, yiftach bo. The only logical result after I recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu meets the criteria is to have bitachon, to have faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to have trust. And ultimately, again, I kind of leave the details of my life to him. Now this is incredible. And I will not suspect HaKadosh Baruch Hu like Choshed. I won't suspect him when it comes to his judgment. Now what does this mean? What does this mean? You see, we'll talk about this more, but part of the power of bitachon and part of the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu meets the 7 criteria, what that means is that even when something happens in my life that I don't like, I recognize that it comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu always bestows chesed. I recognize that it comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu is involved in my life from beginning to end. I recognize that it comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in control of everything. So suddenly, again, I'm not just able to go ahead and absorb and spiritually ingest the positive things that happen, but I'm even able to manage the difficulties as well. It's incredible. I won't suspect HaKadosh Baruch Hu of wrongdoing when he visits difficult circumstances upon me. And ultimately, I won't get angry, I won't get upset because of the choices that HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes for me. Well, what an incredible formulation. I won't get angry as a result of the choices Hashem makes for me. Right? Incredible. In other words, I recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes certain choices, and and again, once I accept the 7 criteria that Hashem fulfills these criteria, then halacha l'maisa, I can't get upset because I recognize again it comes from a God who is all powerful, all knowing, is a chacham, never falls asleep, is involved with my life at all times. No one is more powerful than him. He constantly showers chesed. And so I may be, of course, hurt or I may be upset at times, momentarily or episodically, but I won't get angry at HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kimo Shamar David Alav Shalom, Kos Yishuos Tasa, V'Shem Hashem Ekra, V'Amar Tzaron V'Yagon Emtzo V'Shem Hashem Ekra. As David HaMelech says, Kos Yishuos Tasa, when I lift up a cup of salvation, V'Shem Hashem Ekra. So David HaMelech is saying, in good times, I thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for everything that He's done for me. But at the same time, David HaMelech also says, Tzara V'Yagon Emtzo, even when I find myself in the midst of difficulty and despair. At the end of the day, b'shem Hashem ekra, I still have faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I still have trust in Hashem as well. So they will say this really represents the conclusion of Perek Beis. So we end off establishing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu ultimately, again, is the one who goes ahead and meets all 7 criteria. And as a result of the Ribono Shel Olam meeting that criteria, it behooves me to have complete bitachon in Hashem. So I think just in a final moment, we're going to begin Perek Gimel the next shir, Meretz Hashem. But in a final moment, let's just quickly review the 7 different criteria. Number 1, in order to have bitachon in someone or in something, the person or the entity you have bitachon in, number 1, has to have rachmanis, has to have compassion, has to have love, and has to have pity. Okay? Number 2, ultimately, if you're going to have bitachon in someone, that person must be absolutely focused, never falls asleep, and is always committed to ultimately, again, to addressing my needs. Criteria number 3, the person I'm going to put my bitachon in has to have absolute power. Absolute power, so that nothing could undermine what he wants to accomplish. Number 4, right? If you're going to have bitachon on someone, he has to have complete das, complete knowledge about the individual to know what's best. Number 5, ultimately, again, he has to be involved. Has to be involved in everything about the person's life, from beginning to end. Number 6, absolute control about what happens to the individual. And number 7, he must be a Baal Chesed, ultimately, again, who bestows that kindness upon the individual, even if he doesn't deserve it. All right, so these are the 7 criteria. HaKadosh Baruch Hu meets them all. Emir Hashem will continue with Parag Gimel. Emir Hashem the next year. Shkayach, everyone.